Welcome, everyone. Continue introducing yourself in the chat. It's great to see folks joining us from all over the country. We've got both coasts and everywhere in between represented, it looks like. We'll invite you to continue the in the chat introductions as we get started. We have a number of items that we want to cover today, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. My name is Sarah Bodor, and I'm the Senior Director for Capacity Building at the North American Association for Environmental Education. I'm just going to go over a couple of really quick housekeeping tips and then turn it over to my colleague Grant to actually dive into the program part of today's webinar. It looks like, Grant, I might need you to advance the slide. Thank you. So at this point in time, I'm sure everybody's really familiar with Zoom, but I did just want to let you know that you can continue using the chat to introduce yourself as we go through. If you have questions, please use the chat to dump any questions in there. My colleague, Carrie, will be keeping an eye on the chat, as will those of us who are speaking on today's panel, and try to get to those questions towards the end. I did also just want to let you know that the webinar will be recorded, and we'll be able to share a recording of the webinar, including the chat. And so if you have resources that you think might be relevant to folks attending this webinar that you want to share, we'll be saving that as well and make sure that everybody who registered has access to that information. And then lastly, I just want to let you know that we do have closed captions available. If you have not ever done that before, it's really easy. If you'd like to see captions as we go, you can just use the captions menu. You can even include a translation if you need a translation from English into a language that you're more comfortable with. And so with that, I just want to say a big shout out to Carrie Albright on the NAAEE team, who's done a lot of the behind the scenes support for this webinar today. And as I mentioned before, she'll be keeping an eye on the chat to make sure that your questions and any technical issues that you might have get addressed as promptly as possible. And I'll turn it over to you, Grant, to jump into the program.
Hi, everybody. Ani Bojo, or greetings. I'm Grant Kaliniecki. I'm the Outdoor Policy Coordinator for the National Association, or the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. I'm excited to celebrate and share about 2023 policy successes in youth outdoor policy, progress on state policies that advance youth outdoor engagement and education in general, and also to start looking forward to and getting excited for 2024 with some of the state legislators and community leaders working on youth outdoor policy. So first, I'd like to just introduce the Youth Outdoor Policy Playbook. The Youth Outdoor Policy Playbook is a collaboration between national partners with a broad range of focus and expertise to connect on shared interests. And our ultimate goal is to support, amplify, and collaborate the work of local communities, leaders, and decision makers that help kids spend meaningful time outside. We do a lot of things, including things like this webinar, where we celebrate and share new ideas and innovations. We also highlight existing policy solutions, and we connect leaders and communities across the country. You can check out our website at youthoutdoorpolicy.org. The partners that make up the partnership are the Children in Nature Network, the North American Association for Environmental Education, the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, and the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project. And we'll hear from all of those today. And we also have our website online. You can check that out at youthoutdoorpolicy.org. As an FYI, we'll be updating that, and that will be available hopefully at the end of this spring. But quickly, I wanted to give an overview on the state outdoor policy side. The National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, the organization I work for, tracks outdoor recreation, education, access, and equity policy. We're a national network of about 1,400 state legislators that coordinate shared learning and action on environmental issues. One of our major policy trackers is outdoor policy, and 2023 was a really big year for outdoor policy. We saw over 200 bills and ideas for new laws that were introduced in a vast majority of states. And they covered a wide range of strategies, all focused on restoring or creating opportunities for humans to spend time in nature and restore those relationships to nature and time outdoors. Of those, 67 bills were enacted, so they became law, and those will all create, protect, or expand outdoor engagement in 23 states and territories. This is especially important for us because outdoor policy continues to be one of the most important bipartisan spaces for environment-related policy. So people from different political parties work together on a lot of those bills. The state policy topics that we predominantly track are trails, which an example of that would be that Alabama enacted a new strategic trail network plan. Learning, we'll talk a lot about those today with the Maryland Outdoor Preschool Bill and the Washington Outdoor Recess Bill. Governance, so for example, Louisiana established a Healthy Children Outdoor Task Force to promote child wellness. Funding, New Mexico established a $150 million permanent legacy fund, which I believe Angel was a little bit, actually quite a bit involved in, and can talk a little bit more about. It also permanently funded their Outdoor Equity Fund in New Mexico. And access and equity, those can range across a huge array of topics, but they're one of the biggest growing issues in outdoor policy. An example of that would be a Colorado task force to study disability rights and inclusion in the outdoors. And in the past year, one of the biggest ones for those was a Nevada Division of Outdoor Recreation bill that encouraged the collaboration between outdoor recreation resources and the education department. Sarah Bodor can talk a little bit more about what we're looking at federal level.
Great, thank you so much. I just have a really brief overview of some of the work that we do at NAAEE, focusing primarily on federal policy related to environmental and outdoor education, including climate change education. And a big part of our federal agenda is focused on making the case for education as a critical tool to address complex environmental issues. We find that education is very often left out of the suite of tools when elected officials are thinking about how to solve complex environmental problems, including climate change. And I have up here just a short list of some of the bills that we've tracked for a number of years now. These aren't necessarily pieces of legislation that we expect to pass during this Congress, but we feel that it's really important that we continue to build support, both conceptually for education and its role in the environmental crisis, as well as for these specific pieces of legislation. So many folks may be familiar with the No Child Left Inside Act, which has been introduced into Congress for more than a decade now, but would really increase support for environmental literacy plans at the state level and for their implementation at a local level. And those would include opportunities for outdoor education as a regular part of the school day. And then there's a Living Schoolyards Act, which is a newer bill that would similarly provide support through U.S. Department of Education, but really focused on greening school grounds and creating vibrant, rich outdoor learning spaces on school grounds across the United States, and the professional development that teachers need to be able to use those green schoolyards effectively. And then lastly, there is a Green Ribbon Act, which is a really relatively new piece of legislation that would expand the U.S. Department of Education's Green Ribbon Schools program. It would provide funding to states to administer that program. It would provide support to Green Ribbon Schools awardees for the actual travel to Washington, D.C. For the annual ceremony. And it would also expand that program to allow for community-based organizations to be recipients of that recognition program as well. And I just want to make a quick plug for NAAEE's EE Pro platform. If you want to stay updated on these federal bills as we track them, we do have an EE Pro platform where you can join affinity groups. There's an advocacy and policy group that I moderate, and we also have a quarterly policy newsletter called EE Advocate, and you're welcome to subscribe to that for regular updates on these pieces of legislation. And then the last thing I want to plug before I turn it over to my other colleagues is that we do have our Natural Start Alliance, which is a network of advocates and educators who are focused on early childhood environmental education so that our youngest learners have access to opportunities to play and learn in nature. And that conference will be in Portland, Oregon this year and takes place July 31st through August 3rd. There's currently an open call for proposals, and you are all welcome to attend that conference and to put in a proposal for any work that you might do in the early childhood EE space. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Beard, who is my colleague at the Children in Nature Network. David is Director of Policy and Government Affairs, and he's got some updates to share with you as well.
Thanks. Well, good morning or good afternoon, I guess, for everyone. Welcome to the call today. David Beard, and I'm sitting in Seattle, Washington, home of the future NCAA football champions tonight. I am hoping. So just wanted to shout out a few things. If you're not familiar with Children in Nature Network, we are a national organization that supports communities to help connect children to nature using a variety of strategies. You may know our Connecting Cities and Children's to Nature work, or perhaps our Nature Everywhere work that's currently happening. But some other things that I want to highlight is our conference, another conference for you to consider attending, May 28th through the 31st in Madison, Wisconsin. It's a great opportunity wherever you sit, whether you work in a program or in a school or more in a system setting. There's lots of great sessions and speakers for you there. So come join us. I also put in our research library, which is an amazing resource to help find literally anything you could possibly want in the children in nature space. There's a great search engine too. I'm happy to help walk through that if you need any support. And anything around policy and advocacy regarding children in nature, please don't hesitate to reach out. Excited to be here today, and I think I'm turning it back over to Grant.
Yeah, with that, I would love to introduce Angel Pena from Nuestra Tierra. He's doing us the honor of being both a panelist and a partner today. Nuestra Tierra is a super cool organization that he'll tell you more about, but I'll give you his bio just to skip ahead a little bit. Angel Pena was born and raised in the Rio Bravo Valley. He's a first-generation Mexican-American and father of 3. Angel has had the opportunity to support and lead strong, effective teams that ultimately secured protections totaling millions of acres across the American Southwest. A founding member of the Next 100 Coalition and now the executive director of the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project, he's in the business of people empowerment, working to empower the people that have true, authentic, and deep-rooted ties to the land. Angel, go ahead and take it.
Grant. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And Sarah, David, always a pleasure and an honor to be able to co-conspire with you and your teams. Yes, my name is Angel Damian Soto Peña. I am first the father of 3 crazy kiddos. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that, because that is truly what fuels the fire here at the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project, where the team and I wake up every day to ensure that deliberately historically excluded communities, not only do we have access to the outdoors, but that we have access to the public land management process. And we do that through co-conspiring with amazing folks like my colleagues on this call, as well as advocacy, education, and good old people power. The Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project, we had the amazing privilege of leading a coalition here in the state of New Mexico that created the first of its kind, New Mexico Outdoor Equity Fund. Others have followed its suit. California, Colorado, Nevada, North Carolina just got their amazing outdoor equity grant program that was released just a couple months ago, with those folks doing the work, doing the amazing work of getting the people who have everything to lose out in the ground, creating memorable, not only experiences, but really empowering that next generation to really move that needle in that forward direction. One of the most exciting things, we're just going to talk about 2 quick exciting things here at Nuestra Tierra. One of the first here is with the New Mexico Outdoor Equity Grant Program. The completion of last year, 2023, it looks like as a total, we've been able, the state and its partners and its colleagues and its co-conspirators have been able to support just about 65,000 kiddos and the opportunity to create educational opportunities outside, as well as making memories and driving the path forward as to what conservation should and could look like. When we say 65,000 kiddos in a state of a population of just about 2 million, we're really excited about where this is going to end. For us here at Nuestra Tierra, this is the type of work that is truly going to change the world. Because forward is always the battle cry for us. We also created the Outdoor Future Initiative, where Nuestra Tierra pulled together leaders from across the country, both of geographic and ethnically diverse backgrounds, to make sure that this crazy idea was being led by lived and learned experience. So the Outdoor Future Initiative, because we know everybody in the DC Beltway, and the Outdoor Future Initiative is the National Outdoor Equity Grant Program. The Outdoor Future stands for Fund for Underrepresented Tribal, Urban, and Rural Equity. This success for the Outdoor Future Act is not only to instigate other states to create their own outdoor equity grant programs, but make sure that when states do make that first move of institutionalizing an Outdoor Opportunity Act, that there is resources to help the rubber meet the road, and so that this crazy idea can live to its intent year one. Here you'll see we brought this amazing group of leaders together in 2021, just in trust building, because for us, it's all about the cultivation of community that leads to conservation. And so that's what we prioritized in 2021. In 2022, we gathered feedback and touched base with frontline organizations who had been doing the work. 2023, we officially finalized the Outdoor Future Opportunity Act. In 2024, with everybody on this call who have joined us, we're excited to collaborate to see how we can make sure it's not just a successful introduction, but that we are really truly able to pass the Outdoor Future Initiative and take the amazing steps that is needed to change the world by empowering the next generation of Americans and everybody to own this in a real way. And so I believe that is it for me, Grant. Appreciate y'all. Yes, my colleague put our link there in the chat. If anyone wants to get a hold of us, please let us know. We're always down for a good time with good people. Thanks, guys.
And with that, I would love to also introduce our other two panelists. I'll start by introducing Delegate Michelle Guyton. She's a state delegate representing Maryland District 42B. Last year, she passed House Bill 525 to create the Outdoor Preschool Pilot Program, and 2 years ago, she passed House Bill 749 to create a pilot program for a Park Explorers program. It's a grant program to target youth populations with minimal access to green spaces, promote the positive aspects of being outdoors, and provide conservation concepts and local history and culture in its messaging. In the past, she was on the Ways and Means Committee and the Education Subcommittee, and was on the Board of Education before she was in the General Assembly. Her focus is ensuring appropriate and accessible education for everyone, including and especially those with disabilities. Now that she's on the Environment and Transportation Committee, she can focus even more on making sure kids can get the positive benefits of learning in nature and being outdoors. And I will hand it over to Sarah to introduce our last panelist.
Great, thank you. I'm really pleased to introduce Julie McCleary today. Julie is the Director of Research Practice Partnerships at the University of Washington's Center for Leadership in Athletics. In that role, she conducts and translates research into actionable community-oriented solutions and programming. Her primary areas of focus are coaching, youth sports and physical activity, play equity, and women in sport. One of her primary research to practice initiatives is the 2019 State of Play Research, a landscape analysis of youth physical activity in King County, Washington, which served as the springboard for the King County Play Equity Coalition. The coalition is comprised of over 100 organizations focused on systemic change in the youth physical activity sector and has resulted in several policy wins, including new elementary recess requirements in Washington state. Julie received a BA from Georgetown University, a master's from Harvard, and a PhD from the University of Washington, and she is in her second year of a JD program at Seattle University. Thanks for being here with us.
First of all, thank you so much for joining us. I totally agree with Sarah. I would love to just leave a little bit of space for you to tell us a little bit about what you accomplished in 2023. And was there anything we missed in your intros or something that you would love to share with us today?
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to this wonderful event. I think this really puts a bow on a lot of the work that I've done over the past, not just 6 years in the General Assembly, but also over the past 12 with my work in special education and the Board of Education here. So when I was reassigned to what is truly the best committee in the General Assembly of Maryland, which is the Environment Committee, I was thinking, how am I going to find my place as an educational advocate, as a child psychologist in the Environment and Transportation Committee? Well, the bills we're talking about today show that, in fact, I feel like I have, and that I'm there for a really important reason, and that is to try and merge development, mental health, and education with the importance of environment, because environment really is mental health and education. So, I'm happy to talk about those bills in more detail separately. You can tell me what you want to hear from me, but I'm very excited about both my outdoor preschool bill, which is it passed after 2 years. It did not pass after 1, but it is well underway. And everyone has really come to the table and put a lot of work into figuring out what specific regulations we need to have in place to get started with this pilot program this year. And so that is very exciting. It was on a fast track timeline, and it looks like we're actually going to make it. The Park Explorers program, which is also a really, really cool program that I developed over COVID, really, to try to get kids out of their basements and out from in front of the computers and into the outdoors, but also for their mental health. And because we were hearing that we don't have a great pipeline of environmental professionals coming up, like we need more young people interested in those sorts of careers. So there are a lot of reasons behind these bills, but I couldn't be more excited about presenting them to you, and the fact that we're actually seeing them come to fruition, which is, an important part of the work we do, but it doesn't always happen this easily or this quickly.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I guess I would start just a little bit more on play equity. I think in seeing who introduced themselves, it's more of an outdoor rec environmental education group, and I don't always have the opportunity to speak in front of those groups, though we do work in those sectors. And one thing I would sort of rally us all towards is sort of a common understanding of the intersection of play with both sport and outdoor recreation and free play. And that's really what we consider play equity, is that youth have the opportunity for joyful movement in their own communities on their terms. And unfortunately, that's just not available to so many kids for so many different reasons. And that's the systemic work that the King County Play Equity Coalition is doing. And one of the places where kids spend a tremendous amount of time is in school. And so we formed in 2019, and the State of Play report called for working with schools, empowering schools to be that hub for connection to the outdoors and to physical activity. And so we got to work pretty quickly on deciding that we were going to try to do some policy work within 4 schools, and recess policy emerged after the pandemic, I would say. Well, let's see, we're not really post-pandemic, but emerged, in 2021 into 2022 as our first priority. And, I can talk more about the steps we took to get there, but I would say that, as other folks have spoken to, it took more than the 1 year. It really started at the very beginning with the State of Play report that our state and our county agreed that lack of physical activity and lack of access to joyful movement is important, and especially coming out of the pandemic. As Michelle spoke to, like mental health was a huge concern, and this is just one intervention and one approach that we knew that folks might be able to get behind. And our coalition of 100 organizations pre-existed the work we were doing. We formed an advocacy team, and that advocacy team kind of went ahead and did the deep work of finding a legislator and championing a bill, which I can talk more about. But we join about 12 other states, I think, who have recess policies now. It should be all of them. Recess equity is hugely problematic issue. Kids who are least likely to have adequate recess are youth of color and youth in lower income communities and schools. And it's just something that should be federal, and it's not. So we all have to do the work at the state level to make sure that young kids in elementary school are outdoors playing, because that is how they learn. And it doesn't mean that we're taking away from learning. It means that we're adding to it.
Angel, I know you had a chance to talk a little bit more beforehand. Anything else you want to add before I ask another question? Right.
Grant, can I add just one thing based on a question or a couple of comments in the chat? I have to give credit. We're sitting here hearing from University of Washington. I have to give credit to Washington State for the work that we were able to do on the outdoor preschool program, because they were the first state to actually move forward in this arena. And it has been so helpful to me and to our group to have them actively participating. We've been meeting with the Washington State Department of Ed and Early Child Care to help develop our own program. So I want to also offer, I saw a couple of people saying, how can we get this going in our states? And I believe one of them was even Pennsylvania. I want to offer that as well. We've learned a lot through this process of how to kind of sell the bill, how to educate people about outdoor nature preschools, but also like the nuts and bolts of what sort of regulations need to be in place. So I'm happy to work with them as Washington State has worked with me, and really try to advance this all over the nation, because I think it's really going to be an innovative and fabulous program for our littlest ones.
That leads into a great question I had for you, not to praise myself. What did you need to know to work on this? Who had to be involved in that? So clearly you needed the background of other states having worked on it before, but for other innovative ideas, like for example, your Park Explorers program, there wasn't anything quite like that. Who was all involved in that?
No, so that was in collaboration with our Park and Recs in our county. So what we did was, and for those of you, I probably should have given a better overview of these bills. So this is we call it Park Explorers program, which is available for children, pre-K up to 21. And there's a reason for that as well, because we were looking for that pipeline, right? And we've asked the counties who chose to participate in this. This is also considered a pilot, but it is funded through the next several years coming up. We're hoping that we'll be able to expand it to put together some curriculum, and we're aiming this particularly at areas, and I know that we just heard about recreation equity. This is about outdoor equity. Not all kids have access to green spaces, and so we're trying to target communities and children and young people who don't have that access as much. But in order to really put that together, we needed to work a lot with folks at the local level, which legislators don't always do. Right? We had to hear from them, what was going to work with them, how much money how much money did they need, and really put all the sort of the nuts and bolts together in the bill so that they could really have a jumping off point that was going to be effective for them. And I'm very excited. We've got 2 counties putting it into place. They're ready to roll right now. And then by the end of the year, we should have some reports saying, how well is this working? Are kids actually utilizing the program? Who are those kids? Which is a big part of that equity piece. Who are those kids? Where are they coming from? Are they finding it a useful experience? All of those sorts of things that we wanted them to collect. So I'd like to collect data, and that is something we're definitely doing. And then after, I think we've got up until 2026 for funding at this point. At that time, we're hoping we'll be able to expand to other counties when they see how well this is working and that the programs are already in place. So for that one, it was a lot of local interaction. I would say for the outdoor preschool program, this one was a little bit harder. Like I said, the first bill passed in 1 year. I just kind of had to do the work ahead of time. preschool was harder. It's because legislators don't have an understanding of what we're talking about. And so the first year there were a whole lot of jokes. What are these kids just running around in the snow? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, yeah, they are, but that's not always a bad thing, right? And so the thing that made the difference between the first year and the second year is taking key legislators to programs. So we asked all of our programs, and we work with a whole bunch of them, to invite all of their legislators to come visit. A sunny day, a rainy day, a snowy day, whatever it happened to be, and to really let them see firsthand the way that I did, right? When they sold me on this, just the joyful exuberance, creativity, and positivity, and really positive development that we're seeing from these kids in this program. Again, this was also an equity issue because they were not licensed in the state of Maryland. We certainly had a lot of them, right? But they were so limited in which kids and which families they could accept because they had to be full pay. They couldn't access scholarships, for instance, right? That's an equity issue. They couldn't keep them, they operated more as camps, right? So they couldn't have longer hours. That's an equity issue. So a lot of the way that I think we finally got this across and 2 years isn't bad. It usually takes longer. So I'm not complaining, but educating people, letting them see it firsthand, really great programs. And then also talking about the equity issues that we're facing and the real data behind the importance of outdoor education. And I think that's how we sold it. So I think the other thing about this bill that's different than some other bills that we put together, while there is a stakeholder group, a work group that's putting together the regs, this was not put in as a work group bill. And I think that's really, really important. Right? I do work group bills when I don't have answers. I think it's reasonable to do sometimes, but so often that really is sort of, as we always say, kicking the can down the road, right? I'm an impatient legislator. I want to see things happen, right? So the work group in this bill was specifically tasked with moving this forward. It wasn't tasked with figuring out whether we were going to do it or not. So, and I think that's a very different way to approach legislation. So, I don't know if I answered your question at all, but hopefully.
No, that was fantastic. Same question to Julie and Angel. Who needed to be involved to make this happen? What precedent were you building on, if any?
Angel, you want to go first? Me? I'll go. Okay, got it. Great. Yeah, I mean, I'll pick up on a few themes there, just starting with data, right? The data was essential. And the good news for those of us working in this space is that there's really irrefutable data about the importance of both connection to the outdoors and physical activity and movement for kids' mental health and for their learning. So telling that story and finding great ways to tell that story, I think, is important. We still, as adults, find lots of ways to get in the way of making that happen. And so I think that's the other part, is using some data to help people understand that it's wanted by the majority of stakeholders. So we did a survey. It's notoriously challenging to survey and understand what's happening with recess in particular, because it can be very classroom based, not even school level often. But we did a survey that showed that approximately 75% of elementary school parents in Washington State didn't think their kids were getting enough recess time, right? And that they thought 45 minutes would be enough recess time. So really kind of front loading that data is a lot of the work that we did ahead of time. We also had the coalition already, and I can't, I really can't highlight that enough. We had these organizations at the table who had already agreed broadly to this concept and these strategies to increase play equity. And they were there at the ready to call their legislators, to have meetings, to sign in pro, to do all the things that were necessary. Even if they weren't directly involved in the day-to-day, they were there, and we were keeping them apprised on a regular basis. And that was also a really cross-sector, we're a really cross-sector coalition, which I think is important. So we had folks, the Washington Trails Association, Washington Recreation and Conservation Office, who I saw someone's on the call with them today, to the pro teams, all the Seattle professional sports teams, Parks and Rec, schools, and direct service providers. About 60% are direct service providers in our coalition. So really cross-sector coalition. And then the last two that I'll highlight in the coalition and in terms of getting voices and stakeholders at the table: pediatricians, really strong lobby, great presence. Seattle Children's Hospital, really important part of this coalition. And then teachers. And we were able, I think the really big piece, we were able to get the teachers union to support the bill. And they were a really important ally. We did this with no budget, no funding. This was our first time as a coalition doing state level advocacy, but the lobbyist for the state teachers union helped us, and he was a lobbyist for us, and he taught us a lot. And I think that's a big reason why we were successful. So I would say, you know, a broad supportive coalition, a lot of great data, and then folks who are just ready to like dive in and do the work and tell the story and be passionate about what they're doing with the bill. So that's what I would advise.
Thank you, Miss Julie, Miss Michelle, appreciate that. And, you know, here for Nuestra Tierra, I think it became clear that work needed to be done after a strong acknowledgement. An acknowledgement that our public lands and waters are often seen as a defining feature of our nation's shared character and heritage, but are inaccessible to most, especially down here on the southern border, here on the frontera. As a first-generation Mexican-American, son of labor workers, it was not common for me to be able to go out and play on the weekends because we worked outside all day. And so it was really when I became a parent that me and a couple of friends throughout the state of New Mexico just wanted to create what we now call experiential learning opportunities. But what Ms. Representative Bhutan was saying, is it just about getting kids outside? Kind of. Yeah, it does start there. We don't have to overthink it. And it was after a couple of these friends, we quickly realized and again acknowledged we couldn't put every family or kiddo in our truck to go outside and go fishing, hunting, or camping. We had to look at the tools in our tool belt. And that's where policy was a clear avenue for us to really instigate some of this amazing work that we wanted to see shared with our neighbors, with my abuelita, with our friends. And so that's kind of how it started for us. When did we start working on this? When this group of friends was just fed up with it, and when we were running out, when we couldn't pay for enough fuel. And that's when we said we need to work with the tools in our tool belt. We need to identify political champions like state representatives who are willing to authentically learn with us and live this reality with us so that we could carry this bad boy across to the finish line. And so that's how it started for us. Who was involved? Labor workers, teachers, nurses, my abuelita was a big part of it to get us kicked off. All of my friends' grandparents were a big part of it. Pastors, fathers, first generation Americans, people who don't even have the opportunity to call themselves yet Americans. That's who it took to pull this crazy idea, put it on a piece of paper, and endlessly apply the pressure to get what we needed. And we needed to see our community outside. We needed to see our community supported to be able to live and learn the way how we are going to collectively change the world. And that's by just caring for one another, looking out for one another, and creating experiential learning opportunities with one another outside. So that was, and it was fun. Gosh, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, God, you know, it wasn't amazing and fun. So it felt good while we did it too. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Great. Appreciate it.
Can I just add on a little bit, just in terms of both the timeline and then what Angel said made me think of something else in terms of so Tracy's question. For us, it was about 2.5 years. So like late 2020 into early 2021, and then the bill was passed in 2023. So I think that was helped by a number of things, some of which I mentioned, but just that other states had done it. So we really leaned on all the other states that have done it. So that's what's so good about these kind of conversations, is that we all need to lean on each other, and it'll take less time if we don't have to reinvent the wheel of some of these policies. And then also I forgot to talk about youth involvement. We had we have a youth action team as part of our coalition, and a number of youth that were part of that, as well as a few other youth were engaged in giving public testimony. We had some youth write some op-eds. There was even a great public testimony from like a whole 7th grade class. We didn't orchestrate this, but a whole 7th grade class wrote some opinions for public testimony and got to give those in front of the legislature. So there were about 4 or 5 kids who represented them. So, you know, the more stakeholders, the better, but this was for youth. And so to have them involved was really special and important. Thanks.
Messenger matters, no doubt. Absolutely.
Beautiful, thank you. Building on some of the topics you've raised and some questions in the chat, I'd be curious, what do you see as an effective relationship between legislators, community organizations, youth, the community at large? Like, what do legislators and communities need to know or do to work together effectively? That can also be lessons you've learned, challenges you ran into, or unexpected strengths you found working with different folks. I'll let you percolate on that. I know that's a big one.
Michelle, you're muted if you were starting. While she unmutes, I'll go ahead. I'm by no means an expert. As I said, this was our first foray, and we managed to find an incredible legislator, Tawana Nobles, who was a champion for us, and she was a former school board member and an education champion. And when I say she worked directly with us at every turn, like, I'm not overstating that. Like, when objections came up on the floor, you know, I was getting texts, how do you want me to respond to this? Like, it was just an absolute true partnership. And I think that it was her willingness to be a partner like that just made a tremendous difference. I don't know if that's how everybody works, but I was so impressed with that was the way that she was working. And I think the fact that we had such a broad coalition meant that she could do that comfortably. So I'd love to hear from Michelle, you know, what you like to see in a community partner that allows you to really be an advocate, you know, on the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. You can hear me now, yes?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, I had to join in again on my phone. Absolutely, I think that from my side of things, the advocates that were working, particularly on this preschool bill, were truly amazing. They were, and if you work in that area, which many of you do, you understand how if you're a believer, you're a believer, and that goes a long way, right? So the first year, I didn't know it was going to be as hard to sell as it ended up being, which is one reason it didn't pass. I didn't foresee the sort of the lack of understanding that we had. So this group of advocates got together and I said, look, you know, if you want to pass this bill, I'll do everything I can on my side, but I'm going to need everybody to get out there, rally their parents, get testimony in, make sure that they are talking to their legislators as well, particularly the ones on the pertinent committees. And they did it. We had, I would say, over 200 letters of testimony from parents who all over the state who had children in these sorts of programs and wanted to pass the bill. We had, I mean, every single legislator in the relevant committees, I think, had been contacted. So they got the bill passed, right? I sort of led them to, you know, I told them what we needed to do, but they got the bill passed. And I think had they not been as adamant about their excitement, it wouldn't have happened just by myself. So, but you also need to know who your primary, you know, advocates are and who can sync it. I mean, we all have certain groups who can sync a bill, just one of those groups. And you have to know who they are, and your legislators should possibly know that unless they don't pass many bills. And you have to go to them first and say, you know, what, do you have a problem with this? For us, a lot of it is, you know, the state teachers union, right? If you're doing a bill like this and the state teachers union thinks it's a terrible idea, they can really make it difficult to pass the bill. So you want to make sure that all of those groups hear about it first. I go to departments. That is something not a lot of legislators do, but because I used to work in, I was on the board of ed, I can go to them and say, I want to work with you. I don't want to just throw legislation at you and make you do it. I want to make sure it's workable. That went a really long way as well, because they were the ones ultimately who ended up doing the work.
I'd only add to Madam Representative that on this side, on the other piece, for us, what really helped showcasing to our legislative champion was that we could effectively cultivate community, and that we're excited to co-conspire with one another and create the cover, and speaking as a parent, encourage the good behavior to keep that pressure endlessly applied. I think that was and building of trust. I think that's always what we try to do, and that's one of the tactics we prioritized in the Outer Future initiative, is that with one another we were going to trust one another, because once you have that trust, then you're able to dive into some of these perhaps more nuanced conversations, like the representative is talking about, like, oh, we need to get this done, we need to see this, we need to go here, and it was really rooted in trust and lived and learned experience. I think sounds easy now when I say it. It sounds like, ooh, that's what you got to do, but holy moly, right? That takes a lot of work, and that takes a lot of devotion, and just stubbornness to say, this is what we want, this is how we want to see it, and we're going to get there together collectively, no matter what, for sure. Yeah.
And that's a brilliant, brilliant insight. Thank you so much, because a lot of people come to us with bills. A lot of people say, I'd like to see this. Could you do that? Could you do this? And then there are two things that I always ask. First of all, how much are you willing to help me? Because I can't do it all by myself, right? Outdoor preschool groups, just, I think, outshone almost every other group I've ever worked with in that regard. And then the second thing that I think you're referring to is, are you all in accord, right? Because if you're doing something, I do a lot of work, for instance, with the disabilities community, but if you're doing one thing in the disabilities community and half of them don't agree with it, it's going to be a problematic bill, right? Again, the advocates for this outdoor preschool bill, they were together in this, and that made a huge difference. Yeah. So yeah, make sure your groups aren't splintered.
Yeah, and that brings up a really great point, I think, about when you have a coalition, it's really hard sometimes to make unilateral decisions about what you're willing to accept with regard to compromise, right? And so, we have this broad coalition, we've put forward this really idealistic bill, and then, we get pushback and we go to make changes, and there are some groups who don't want those changes. So how do you hold together, right? It's not as easy as just saying, yes, we'll do that thing. It's like, you have to actually work with everybody to make sure they're willing to stay on board with that coalition as that change gets made. And I'll give you an example. For us, it was, we really wanted recess withholding to be prohibited. Like, you cannot withhold recess from kids for any reason. That didn't fly. And there were folks within our group, particularly because that one is extraordinarily an equity, like probably the highest equity issue, where we know that the withholding of recess happens to Black and brown boys the most of everyone. So that was a really tough one for us. Were we willing to go with strongly discourage instead of prohibit? And we almost didn't do the bill because of that one word change. And so, like, we want to be aligned, headed to working with our legislature, but that takes so much work, like, under the waterline, to bring everyone together and agree and have trust that it's going to be okay.
A quick ramble in the sausage making process. Nuestra Tierra, we lead on a couple of coalitions, both locally and state and nationally. And one of the first things we always work to prioritize is the decision making process. Like, how are we going to make decisions together before we get into the crazy ideas? Let's make sure that we're all on the same page, that we all acknowledge and we all are saying we're going to make decisions in this way. I won't say that that solved all the problems, but it has helped create a backstop for us. Well, we're going to take this on during this decision-making process, right? And there's 100 different ways to make those decisions. But as long as you guys can all coalesce around one, that's at least a very helpful tactic we've tried to implement at every level.
Yeah, I think part of that decision-making process has to be upfront. Okay, this is our ideal piece of legislation, right? Let's all agree ahead of time what we're willing to let go, right? Well, let's not wait till that last minute. Let's agree, because you know, as a legislator, often, not always, what the concerns are going to be on that committee, and who they're going to come from, right? And so, you kind of say, okay, so this might be a sticking point. Can we let that go or can we not? This might be a sticking point. Can we let that go? And for example, with the preschool bill in particular, I was really standing firm on something that I thought was not negotiable. And I think some of the advocates came together and decided amongst themselves, we're okay with that. And I'm like, hey, if it works for y'all, it works for me. Like that's okay. But they really have to be the driving force. If I'm doing a bill for a group, a profession, the experts in that field, I'm not the expert. I'm kind of an expert, but not that kind of expert. Then I have to really rely on them. And if they say kill it, and I have killed bills before because an amendment has come in and they said that gutted the bill, and I'm like, absolutely, we're not doing the bill. I've done that on the floor, actually. Forget that bill. But it's important that everyone try to be on the same page. And there was a lot of flexibility in this. And I really, really think it worked to our benefit, not only during the bill passage process, but afterwards, because we were so willing, all of us, so willing to work with the department and with all of the other important agencies and advocacy groups that they're willing to work with us. And those relationships are super important. So, yeah.
These are such great areas of good advice for our listeners. And I think we've heard a lot of really great take-home messages based on your experiences around coalition building and the diversity of the sector that you bring together. And I love this conversation about being aware of sort of what your red lines are and what you're willing to let go of. So thank you so much for this conversation. I want to shift gears just a tiny bit in our last few minutes and ask each of you if you have any thoughts that you want to share in terms of what you're most excited about to work on in 2024 and whether it's your own work or where you just see opportunities for the future. To deepen this work, to get innovative. I would just love to invite any reflections from the three of you. And I would also love, I think Carrie's put this in the chat, but we'd love to hear from those of you who are listening in. If you have any big youth outdoor engagement initiatives that you're going to be working on in 2024, it would be fun to hear that from all of you. Anyone want to go first?
I'll go. It's quick. We are going to do a county focus this session, so we're not engaging at the state level. We're going to work on combining the Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights with the Children's Sports Bill of Rights for one comprehensive play equity Bill of Rights for King County, and work with our King County council members to learn about that and ideally over time get something passed and find some funding for that work at the county level. And then in 2025, we're going to go back to work at the state level, and we're going to be working on shared use agreements and strengthening shared use agreements, which are a precursor, as you all know, to a lot of this work, particularly green schoolyards and providing access to green spaces within communities when the schools are the main public asset that folks will have access to. So strengthening shared use agreements statewide.
So I'm focused on growing these bills. I'm focused on shepherding them through the actual process. Each of them is about to truly become reality. So far, we've just been working on getting them there, but they're actually going to start. So that's a concern for me, that I make sure that everything is going well and that we can expand, because my hope and my anticipation, I expect that both of these bills will be expanded, hopefully statewide, but at least more expanded to more counties, and for the park explorers, and then statewide for the preschool bill after this initial pilot program. So I'm keeping a very close eye on all of that, attending meetings and watching what's happening. I'm also in charge of the Women Legislators of Maryland Priority Term Initiative, which is early childhood accessibility, right? So I'm trying to work all of these issues, all of these concerns into that as well, as we move forward protecting our childcare profession in Maryland. This isn't exactly one of my biggest bills this year that deal with both children and environment, isn't necessarily an engagement bill, but I am putting in a bill to ban toxic substances from playground surfaces like PFAS and lead. So we're going to get rid of those ripped up tires that children put in their mouths that are full of these substances, hopefully this year in Maryland. And so that kind of is a different take on it, but also related, I think, to what we're talking about.
I'll rock my three. I had to write it down so I don't forget. First, here at Nuestra Tierra, we're very excited to introduce the Outdoor Future Initiative, the Fund for Underrepresented Tribal, Urban, and Rural Equity. What's really defined a definition of success is to empower all 50 states to really invest in the next generation, to invest in our kiddos. Second is to showcase a proof of concept that perhaps we can all collectively show that when we prioritize one another, when we prioritize community, we can still get things done. It doesn't always have to be about the fancy words. It doesn't always have to be about the fancy dinners, but perhaps it can really be about making memories with your kiddos, making new adventures and learning from your abuelita or your elders about being outside when it comes to cultures and traditions. And then lastly, is just to call out that a vision without resources is little more than a hallucination. Perhaps we can all lean into ways, or I think there's tons of room to educate industry how they can line up with community, so that we can really not only have these amazing ideas, but that we can make sure that people are able to make it up to the representative, and so that she can showcase and hear firsthand from these youth, so that Miss Julie is able to take her students out or really move things over at the University of Washington so that they can really dive into these policy issues, or so that, again, my abuelita, she can fly out to DC to make sure that her congressman and her representative and our neighbors are able to, that our neighbors are able to have the ear of our federal representatives. And so always the money piece, it always kind of, always in the back of my head, for sure. And those are my three. Thank you, Grant and Sarah, appreciate it. And Miss Michelle and Miss Julie, appreciate you.
Thank you all so much. This has been just wonderful. We could have done this for a whole nother hour. I think there are a lot of questions that we didn't get to. So we'll have to think about doing this again sometime, but really appreciate the three of you so much. Thank you to Grant and David for joining me today. And again, thanks to the NAAEE team that was sort of behind the scenes. So glad so many of you were able to join us. It's hard to jump into a webinar on a Monday right after the new year, but we're really pleased with the participation, and we will be sharing again the recording, the chat, and the slides with everyone who registered.
Right. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful afternoon.
I forgot it was Monday. It is Monday. Thank you, Sarah, for your leadership. Grant, Dave, appreciate y'all. Bye, guys.
Take care.
Thanks for including me. I appreciate it.
We're so glad you
Thanks,
could join.
David.
Thank you.
Julie.
All right. Talk to you soon.